This week, I'm looking at being a peacemaker. And when you're preparing for your sermons, you sometimes need that link in to what's going on in the world. And the news mirrored my sermon prep so much this week. There was President Trump saying he was a peacemaker. And it made me somewhat slightly shocked, surprised, and actually speechless, which if anybody knows me, knows that's hard to do. He seemed to feel that his role, and the role he would be known for at the start of the presidency, would be as peacemaker. Now he, along with a number of world political leaders, are bringing the current resolution in the Middle East. And prisoners are being swapped, and so are hostages, and people are returning to their homes in Gaza. But it's very much a joint effort, and we're going to have to wait and see how this goes to the end. Now, some have suggested he might want a Nobel Peace Prize, as other presidents have got one, so he would like one too. Now, that does seem like a bit of an ulterior motive. Now, I don't know what he's thinking. I can only go on what some people are suggesting he might be thinking, but we shall see what's happening. But his other actions since becoming president have not been, to say the least, looking like he wants to be a peacemaker. He's been signing presidential executive orders that seem to have gone to anything but being a peacemaker, against caring for the most vulnerable in society, making people feel quite scared and certainly not at peace. In fact, at his inauguration service, which some of you may have seen on the news, Bishop Marianne Bude asked him to care for the most vulnerable in society, and he was somewhat annoyed by what she'd said. Now, not wanting to be too political, but this week really has given so many examples I could discuss. But we'll get to the Bible reading, and it's coming from the Sermon on the Mount. If people want to find it before we get to reading it, it's Matthew 5, starting at verse 3, and for those that are using the Pew Bibles, it's page 968. Now, the Sermon on the Mount is some of the most well-known in the Bible, and the Beatitudes that start of it are some of the best-known lines. It's a whole new way of looking at the world and faith and the way that people should treat each other. And it turned the world of those that heard and understood and took it in on that first time a really different way, a radical way of looking at life with God. It was radical then, and it's radical now. Society then and now looks to the strong and wants victory in the most worldly of ways, as it does today. So we'll read the passage. So we're from verse 3. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And we're going to be looking primarily today at verse 9. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Or in a different version of the Bible, God blesses those people who make peace. They will be called his children. So what is a peacemaker? I'm going to do what you're not supposed to do and say what it isn't before I say what it is. Being a peacemaker is not a peacekeeper. Peacekeepers, they stand between two warring factions and they try and stop them firing at each other. And that could be verbally, or it could be like the UN peacekeepers or the Blue Hats. They are actually currently in 11 different areas of the world. Places like the Democratic Republic of Congo, Western Sahara, but they're still in Kosovo, on the Indian-Pakistan border, and they've been in Israel and Palestine since 1948, since the UN started. They're keeping people apart and keeping people safe. It's not a job I could imagine doing. I'm not that brave. But the lines in the Bible are so much more. It's not just trying to stop two firing people coming and shooting at each other. It's got to be more than that. And when we think about world peace or being a peacemaker, sometimes it just looks like it's too big a thing to be doing. We can't imagine trying to solve the world's problems. But we need to be peacemakers where we are. And if enough people are doing that, that will spread. So a quick definition of being a peacemaker is someone who actively, it's an active thing, seeks to promote peace and harmony in relationships, communities, and situations of conflict. They strive to resolve disputes, mediate, and foster understanding and cooperation amongst individuals or groups. It's more than just being peaceful in situations, living at peace with others. It involves bringing harmony to others. In the New Testament, Paul teaches the importance of peacemaking. In Romans 12, he says, "If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone." That's live at peace with everyone. It's a challenging command, and it's a skill that needs practice and patience. And it's not something you can do on your own. To live at peace with everyone, not just those you like or that like you, but everyone. And it's something that we need to do. As I implied, it's not something we can easily do on our own. We need to be more skilled at it, and we need to rely on the Father's divine help and guidance. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. So being a peacemaker needs us to get involved with people, with their lives, not just at arm's length. We've got to be involved with people, and we can be peacemakers in our families, in churches, at work, or places we attend. And it needs us to get to know people really well. And where there's disputes between people, there are tears, and there's upset. There is silence and bitterness. It's a harsh environment to be in, to get close to. It's one that we might actually want to run away from rather than get close to. Now, somewhere that I saw tears and where there were examples of family breakdown was when Phil and I went to Zambia in 2019. We spent a couple of days with people that were looking after the children, the street children. Some were as young as 6. And they'd run away to the capital, run away from their families, and were living on the streets. Often they were involved with drugs. They were often used to try to get money off other people because they were sweet and lovely, and people would give them money for the older children. The charity I was working with got them into some temporary housing, charity homes for children. But the idea was to try and get them home to their families or to their parents. And making peace between those families and the children was something that took a long time. It took a lot of travelling backwards and forwards, usually out into the countryside where many of them had come from. You needed to ensure that the families would not punish the child who had left when they came back, checking there was actually space for that child to come back to. Because if there were a number of children, that oldest child might have had to have left, and there wasn't room for them to come back. Sometimes it was really unsafe for them to go back. It could take months of careful negotiating. And obviously it was easier if the child was from the capital, because they'd perhaps know of the family, or someone would know of the family and know of the situation. But if they'd come in from the countryside, there was a lot of travelling. And some had only come because they thought the streets would be paved with gold, which it isn't. But others had come from real abusive families. Some were escaping families where HIV had taken their parents, or other family members might be caring for them in not a humane way or a loving way. There were 3 boys that I remember. They were in their mid-teens. It's not dissimilar to how old my son Josh was at the time. And they'd come into the city, they were living in the streets, and I just said, well, surely when the parents hear that you found them, they'll just welcome them back with open arms. And they said, no, that's not what happens. You can't be that naive. They wouldn't do that. They might punish them because they ran away. And that was really a sort of a big eye-opening moment for me. And that was why they had to be really clear as to who could go back And they were talking to these 3 individual families, and one of the boys went back, but others weren't going to go back. And they were kept safe if they would accept coming into this home. Now, hopefully, nobody's here has got family situations that are quite as extreme as that. But as somebody said, when 2 or 3 people are gathered together, there will be conflict. Well, sometimes, not all the time, but often that happens. And sometimes we can end up getting stuck in a triangle where person A is speaking to us about person B, and person B is speaking to us about person A, and it's trying to get that people together and to understand what our position is like. I was thinking of poor Moses, because he wasn't trapped between 2 different groups of people, but he was trapped between God telling him things when he was on the mountain, and then he'd come back down the mountain and he'd speak to the people, and they'd go, oh yeah, no, sorry, we didn't mean to do that. But could God forgive us? And then he'd go back and speak to God. I do wonder sometimes if Moses just went, you know what, you lot talk to each other, because that would have been easier. But no, he spent time and he went up and down, and obviously they then went to the promised land at the end. But it's that being involved and in the middle of those things. And I just wanted to give you some principles about how to be involved when you're in the middle of these things. You need to be listening, have forgiveness on your heart, and humility. It's those sorts of things that are essential to maintaining relationships and resolving conflict. So let's have a little look at those things. With active listening, James said, everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Too often it's really easy to slip into a quick response without truly listening to each side. That's something that I sometimes find I do, that, oh, I can solve this problem, but actually it's not that easy, and we need to sit and listen to the people that are speaking to us. We need to forgive as well and be open to forgiveness. Peter asked Jesus if forgiving somebody 7 times was enough, and Jesus' response was surprising. Not 7 times, but 77 times. While forgiving is not always simple, it's consistently the correct course of action. And we need to have humility and gentleness when we're interacting with each other. Now, I thought it was quite interesting that actually the line suggests that it's a future tense. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Is that because when we're trying to help people, we sometimes get called all sorts of names, and certainly not a child of God? But we know that we're doing the right thing. We're there, we're being with people. The people that we're with may not realize and appreciate what we're doing, but we will be called children of God, and God knows what we're doing. And sometimes we've got to be quite direct with people. It's no use just ignoring things or pussyfooting around things. We've got to be there. And Paul says this in his letter to the Hebrews in chapter 12. No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. Therefore, strengthen your feeble arms and weak knees. Make level paths for your feet, so that the lame may not be disabled, but rather healed. Make every effort to live in peace with everyone and to be holy, because without holiness no one will see the Lord. See it that no one falls short of the grace of God, and that no bitter roots grow up to cause trouble or defile many. I often think it's easier sometimes to ignore the problems, because you need to speak out and you need to make sometimes people feel uncomfortable. Paul speaks of discipline, but it could be speaking truthfully to someone. When it involves 2 people or groups of people, and then you're in that triangle, you can feel like you're being tugged between each one, and you can't win for either for them or for God. I've been reading a book by Ruth Haley Barton, who speaks of the values undergirding Christian communities like this one here. And peacemaking is necessary for the community to build on strong foundations and in a permanent way. And some of those principles were truth-telling, because it's necessary, even if it's painful. Just as Paul said, God needs us to be truthful to allow us to be transformed to be like Jesus. The Holy Spirit has to guide us to ensure that we offer truth in a loving and a gentle way. We mustn't hide or spin the truth. We need to support each other and the parties to find peace. We need to do it with kindness. It's a classic and a basic Christian characteristics. We need both sides to have understanding. And we need to also discern when is the right time to do it and how to do it. Is that in a group or one-to-one? Do you do it, and at what timing do you do it? Conflict resolution can be worked through in a God-honouring way. It takes time, practice, prayer, honesty, and humility. And all those values will ensure that God is involved and that peace can be resolved in that group, wherever they are. It just doesn't always seem it at the time. And unsurprisingly, as God's children, we want to be like Jesus, the Prince of Peace, who enables us to become the peacemakers that we want to develop to. We seek harmony and unity with friends and family. It's essential to being a peacemaker. Daily commitment to those values strengthens relationships, reduces conflict, and creates a more peaceful environment. Now, I wish I was standing here telling you I had solved the mystery of peacemaking. I'd always got it right, and I knew when to say something, what to say, and I could give you a step-by-step guide. I wish I could say that I didn't sometimes lay in bed thinking, what should I have said differently? Thinking, do I say anything at all? Would it be better if somebody else said something? Would it... There's always a good answer, I think. No, it isn't. Should I just ignore it? Did I make it worse? Doesn't that sound like the talk from last week where we're trying to be people pleasers? And yes, sometimes being a people pleaser gets in the way of being a peacemaker. And I'd be lying if I said I'd sorted it all out. I haven't. We're all people, and we do and say the most difficult and wonderful things at times, and sometimes we just can't get it right. I can think of many occasions when I could do it better, and there are missed opportunities in my own family that won't be put right this side of heaven. And I've chatted to a number of you over the last 18 months, and many of you have had family situations where you're trying to help different parts of your family. And on those occasions, I hope the chatting and the praying have helped. Because obviously, there isn't that simple solution, because you'd have thought of it yourself and you'd have fixed it if that was just so simple. And it just takes time. And sometimes it just doesn't feel like there's any way out. I think perhaps sometimes writing things down and then coming to them 6 months later and seeing where the direction of travel has been is something that would really help, because it is those long-term problems that can be there. Because Paul had said that we shouldn't allow those bitter roots to grow and cause trouble. It's those long-term problems that can be really hard to fix. When something quickly flares up, it's easier to talk to someone. It's when there's issues on top of issues, especially in families, when there's the family relationships, there's what they said to them 30 years ago, and all the rest of it that adds up and can cause real problems and takes so long to unknit and resolve. Now, I was thinking about Jesus and how he went and got involved with an argument between the disciples. If you flick further on in your Bibles, in your Pew Bibles, it's 988, to Matthew 20. It's when the mother of Zebedee's sons, James and John, comes to Jesus with her sons, and she kneels down in front of him. So it's verse 20, in chapter 20, verse 20. And Jesus asked her, "What is it that you want?" he asked. And she said, "Grant that one of these two sons of mine may sit at your right and the other on your left in your kingdom." Jesus says, "You don't know what you're asking. Can you drink the cup I am going to drink?" "We can," they answered. Jesus said to them, "You will indeed drink from my cup, but to sit at my right or left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they have been prepared by my Father." When the 10 heard about this, they were indignant with the 2 brothers. Jesus called them together and said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Indeed, whoever wants to become great among you must be my servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served but to serve, but to give his life as a ransom for many." So Jesus there's an argument, and it could have been that he decided, these was James and John. They were kind of the special disciples, many would say, because they were in his inner circle. And they'd come along, well, they'd got their mum to come along and ask, or their mum had decided to ask. Don't know how mums work. And he was like, "You don't know what you're asking for." And they think that they know, but really they don't. And then the other 10 are all coming along going, "But what about me? I want to be special." And that could have caused real long-term problems with the disciples. There could have been separation. There could have been issues. But he brought them all together and got them talking. And I just think this is a great example of how to bring people together so that you're not going to cause that backbiting. And then, of course, Jesus said, again, that topsy-turvy world, that world that says the things that you expect are not the way you want them. They're not going to be the way you think they'll be. "Whoever wants to be the great amongst you must be your servant. Whoever wants to be first must be your slave." That's a whole new way of thinking about the world. So back slightly to politics. As citizens, as people, we need to just go beyond our churches, and we need to go beyond our communities, and we need to advocate for justice that aligns with God's values. We've got to be working towards integrity and stability in our communities, and this means voting for the right political candidates, maybe, who shows integrity and upholds the foundational principles with which our country is built on. Christians work to elect people to promote godly values rather than the world's sinful values. Will help to ensure a just and principled society. By actively participating in the political process and voting for leaders who will reflect these values, we sustain a fair and thriving community that God will bless. Now, I've talked a little bit about some of the challenges and the rewards of being a peacemaker. I mean, it does kind of go hand in hand. We can face opposition, misunderstanding, or complex or deep-rooted conflict, and it can be really difficult. However, when you achieve peace within a family or a workplace or a community, it brings wonderful, wonderful, restful night's sleep and wonderful, enjoyable relationships. It brings that inner peace and sense of fulfillment. It strengthens divided connections that would rather than becoming conflict. And we have that feeling of thankfulness. So as children of God, we are called to embrace peace, which is the antidote of anger and quarrels. Jesus, the Prince of Peace, is our example. Jesus was always on the side of his disciples. He fought for them, forgave them, listened to them, stood in the gap for them, even to the cost of his own life. He understood the difference between showing love to those close to him and standing firm against his enemies. Ultimately, his goal was peace as demonstrated on the cross, when he prayed for those enemies. "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." And that Prince of Peace exemplifies how we should interact with our families, workplaces, neighbours, church communities. Jesus reconciled all of humanity to the Father and to each other through the forgiveness of sins. By living like Jesus, emulating his example, caring for others, and fulfilling the second greatest commandment of loving our neighbour as ourselves, we move closer to attaining a peaceful life with family and friends. James, in the 4th chapter of James, said, What causes fights and quarrels among you? Do they come from your desires that battle within you? So when we fail to get what we want, we often resort to quarrels and fights driven by pride and worldly desires. However, when we submit to God, we embrace his wisdom to overcome conflicts and step towards harmony. And peacemaking is not something that you just do once and get it right. It's an evolving skill which grows deeper and better over time. Navigating conflicts in a balanced way requires both discernment, wisdom, humility, and grace. Granted, there will be some times when peacemaking will just fail, but mostly it does work if you take long enough over it. And it is so much more, peacemaking has the heart at its center. When we love and value others, this skill will become a powerful tool for avoiding and resolving conflict. Having the peace of Jesus within helps with bringing peace to others. Aligning our actions of listening, forgiving, and humility is highly effective against inflaming tensions and instead creates opportunity for reconciliation. Discerning when to stand firm and when to yield ensures our actions reflect not only our convictions, but also a commitment to cherish peace, which mirrors God's love. Someone that many of you will know, Mother Teresa, said this: "Peace begins with a smile. Let us practice peace within our hearts, then extend it to our families, workplaces, communities, and the world, for it is through our actions that we create a ripple effect of harmony." It might be as simple as a smile, but it's often far from that simple. But that's a place where we can all start. It is difficult, because otherwise I don't think Jesus would have mentioned it in those 8 verses. If it was that simple, he'd just assume we'd all be doing it. So the fact that it's in that really early on stage of when he's telling people this is what it's all about, being a peacemaker is really important. There is that glorious recognition that through being a peacemaker, as Jesus planned it, although it will be tough and will be embroiled with other people's lives, we will feel that God is with us and that we will become children of God and that we are there with everybody, this world and the next. Amen.